All right, I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Can everybody online hear us?
Yep.
Cool. Thank you. Um. Yes, we've got a pretty big crowd here. I don't know all of you. I'm glad to see y'all here. I really don't like icebreakers, but I think we probably go around and at least introduce ourselves. So let's, just your name, why you're interested in serving, and or why I pestered you into serving. So yeah, we'll start with folks online. Jenna, you want to?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Jenna Beiser. Sorry, my name's misspelled up there. I am on the Bellevue Planning and Zoning Commission, and I also work for the City of Ketchum Planning Department. So just excited to be part of this process, and I'll kind of act as a liaison to the Bellevue Planning and Zoning Commission at our meetings.
Amanda.
Hey everyone, sorry my camera won't work for some reason. It's trying. But I'm with Project Bigwood and a resident in Bellevue, Idaho, just a couple streets down. So excited to be here and learn more about the process.
Then whoever is online label is Sharon.
Hi, my name is Seth Harrington. I'm the regional labor economist for the Department of Labor for the South Central region. Yep.
Okay, and then around the room, we'll start this table here.
My name is Joel Leon. That's my first name. Last name is Sari with Vital Inc. Architecture, and have our architecture office in the town of Bellevue here. And lived here 28 years. I live south in Griffin Ranch. But because of all those years of traveling through the valley and being a South Valley resident now, I kind of claim Bellevue as my town, even though we all claim the whole dang valley. Never I care what happens to my town. I want to share my expertise.
Hey, I'm Connor. I live down in Elkhorn with my parents, and I work for Jolion too. Been working for him for 3 years at Vital Link Architecture, so I'm architect in training. You can call us ways.
Hi, I'm Michelle Manalo. I've lived in the Valley full-time since 1995. I live Mid-Valley. I married into a very local family. I bought a house in Bellevue in 2013, and I'm part of the Beautify Bellevue world. I have a belief system about this lovely town. I am a couturier, so my business is actually attached to my house, and I work in the film and television industry, taught dance here for 30 years. So I'm the artist person.
I'm Persa Connolly. I'm the director for the Boone County Housing Authority, and that was why I was invited for the housing perspective. I'm a boomerang kid, so grew up in the valley, and I'm happy to be home.
Amber Perks, they were for Idaho Power. I'm assuming that I was invited to the utility and the infrastructure part of things. I'm also part of my role is economic development and community development. So yeah.
Let's go back here.
My name's Tim Burke. I'm the airport director at Freeman Memorial Airport. I've been with the airport for 5 years now, formerly the director of airport operations and public safety there. Our job, we obviously run an airport that's, in my opinion, part of the economic backbone of this community, a vital transportation hub, and at the same time, and in a room full of people from Bellevue who's underneath the flight path, I want you to know I'm cognizant of the fact that airplanes affect, depending where you live, airplanes affect people differently, depending where you live, and we try to be good neighbors as best as we can. We want to make sure that we're part of the strategic vision moving forward.
I'm John Wright. I'm a resident, own a house in Bellevue. I manage the diversion 45 canal, which comes off the river within the city limits. Been in the area for 12 years and pretty excited to be here.
Finally,
It's a great place.
I don't think they all watch the last name. Andrea, can you go?
I'm Andrea. I'm with Mountain Rise. I'm the manager of marketing and communications. I grew up here. I don't live here now, but I do want to move back. I really care about this valley.
Mike McKenna, I run the chamber of the River Valley, involved with all different communities. We do a lot for Bellevue. We're always here to help, as our saying goes. have a couple of kids, I've had friends and family living in Bellevue for 50 years, so. Care about this community, and wanna do what we can help.
Brooke McKenna from the Hunger Coalition, his family here is my family, born and raised here. I'm also representing one of the largest employers in Bellevue and a major service provider here in our community. Super happy to be participating.
Cece?
Hi, everyone. I first became familiar with Bellevue when I was working at Mountain Rise, running the Safe Routes to School program here and a summer program, new summer program out of the library. I kind of just fell in love with it. It was a place-based bicycle education program that we would stop off at different neighbors' houses and visit people's gardens by invitation and art projects and whatnot. And over the years, I've worked with City of Bellevue staff on planning projects. Now I'm a regional planner at the Wood River Land Trust and happy to be.
Hi, my name is I've been here for 30 years. In the valley, I've been living in Bellevue for 5 years. And I've been working for the school district for 20 years and then own a small property management company, so I kind of know little bit of everything, so I'm lucky to be part of this, especially have a voice for the Latino community. Since I've been seeing growing how things be changing more and more.
I'm Evan Stella. I've lived here, was born in the Valley and have lived down in Bellevue for 49 years. I was able to serve on the last plan committee, and this is obviously going to be very different, but I look forward to it. There's been so much change since the last iteration of this document that it will be very interesting and hopefully more inclusive. I was very excited to see the part of bringing younger, like the teen group into. I think that's very important.
Ned Burns, former mayor of Bellevue, former Bellevue City Council member, former Bellevue URA member. I had to deal a bunch with the comprehensive plan, spent 3 years in the state legislature. So I've got, I think, a really good experience of how comprehensive plans go from document to implementation. And excited to help be a part of Bellevue 2025 to Bellevue 2035.
You just barely beat me, so I know I'm not.
I went to the original, not kidding, I actually went to the original. Bellevue City Hall. I've been here before. It's Jim Friday, I'm the superintendent for the school district. Happy to listen, learn, and wherever I can. Thank you.
Mark? I just noticed AI is recording this.
Why am I close this?
Mark Davidson, Blaine County Recreation District. Okay. So that's everybody. So we, gonna get into this in a minute, but, we, take a motion that somebody believes that this agenda was posted correctly. If anybody would like to make that, so there's, okay. Like,
I'll second.
okay, voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any days? Okay. All right, so moving on, housekeeping, we are a official committee of the city. Therefore, we are subject to open meeting law, Americans with Disabilities Act, all the applicable state and federal laws to go along with those. So just keep that in mind moving forward. I think there's gonna be some opportunities for like walking tours and that sort of thing, but we just need to make sure that we're being conscious of how we're going to record the meetings, make them available to the public, make sure that anybody with a disability, which extends well beyond just wheelchairs or like that, can access and participate. So, yeah, that is that. Meetings will all be recorded and captioned and posted on the internet, so don't say anything that you don't want front page of the paper. And so expectations. I know I'll ask a lot of you guys here because you have a specific niche of knowledge or technical expertise in some category. And I think that is great. I think there's value to that. I would ask you all to be thinking very holistically. Don't like say, I'm a housing person, I'm a transportation person, I'm a utility person, like. It all is related and all matters, and you all have a good amount of knowledge, a good amount of local. And so I expect you guys to contribute outside of your comfort zone. And then on that same kind of line, have an open mind. Be considerate of the community at large's needs and interests, but also don't just totally ignore your own personal self-interest. Because the end result of this is going to be a plan that needs to be implemented, and the primary method of implementing planning is through private land transactions and things like that. And so if we're not thinking about how these are going to facilitate personal interest, it's probably not the right thing. You guys have any expectations that you're wanting to get out of this, or anything you want to share with me on?
I have a question. Will this be translated to Spanish for our Spanish speaking?
As much as I can. In final document, at least the like executive summary, action steps, that sort of stuff. I want to make sure that it is quality translation and not just Google Translate, copy and paste. So you know, I'm gonna be fairly specific and selective.
If you have like you have 80% done Google Translate, I can have somebody put asking.
I can also keep an eye out for grant funding for translation services. We've been pursuing that. If I'm interested, is when we want to scope the planning program, the newer planning program, with Land Trust. We have the full intention of doing that, and then short of that. So it seems like there's not a lot of money in the valley to go towards professional translation services, but we're far early enough in the process where if we find the funding.
We're in the early process stages of adopting our budget for next year, and I am putting some set aside money for comp plan work that is not my staff time, and so like stuff like translation services. Well, anything else? Okay, so this is something I'm gonna kind of ask for feedback on now. How do you guys want to organize yourself? You want to be fairly formal, fairly loose? Do you want a chairperson to do stuff?
Loose, and you would be the chair.
Okay.
Yeah. I do have one housekeeping item. I have to eat on a schedule, so unless anyone has an issue with it, I'll eat in the meeting.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
As long as you don't microwave fish.
Not microwave, but today unfortunately it is.
And yeah, bathrooms back by the front door.
Going outside.
Water fountain over behind Andrea there in the corner. You have to have a bottle of water, pepper or something. That's the water that. Yeah. So that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you really anticipating this to be 2 years?
Yeah.
So how long it normally take?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I had the same reaction at this time.
That's fine, I just was curious. When I saw this timeline, that was one of the things that up in my mind.
And it's slow, smooth, it moves fast. Plan for it to be longer and also better. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the scope of work. Did everybody have a chance to review this? Pretty high level document, really, the plan to make a plan. So big goals. Create a realistic, sustainable, and flexible framework for achieving the community's goals. Being reflective of current and likely future conditions. Get all the stuff that the state code wants us to cover, which we are going to do. I don't think it's gonna be formatted quite like it is like in the current comp plan where there is the population chapter and there's the economics chapter and there's the transportation chapter. I think they're all too messy and interrelated for that to be an effective tool. So I think we're gonna just have kind of goals and objectives and standards, and we'll have a box at the end that says this is how this meets all these categories. So the relevant plans, prior studies, including our current comprehensive plan, which I'll send you guys all the link to that to review for our next meeting, so you can have an understanding of that. I made a big spreadsheet of how to score it for the council that one of them filled out for me. So I'll send it all to you guys, but don't feel obligated if it's too cumbersome of a tool. So we are a city, but we are within a county and a region, and there's a lot of interplay between the different cities and areas, and think holistically on their impacts on us and our impacts on them. And then this is kind of a little bit out there, but I want to make sure this tool is something that cities that don't have the resources of Woodward Valley and Bellevue can utilize and copy. And so I'm gonna try to do as much as I can using like just Word documents and like basic office tools, open source, cheap and free stuff, and make it easy for other towns to borrow and borrow. So those are the goals I had. Does anybody else have any objectives that you should be considering and think about?
Looks nice.
Late guy has fries all drinks, right?
Hey, I was at the bank and the notary public was a half hour late, so fine.
Yeah, introduce yourself.
I'm Tim Frazier. I live on 217 Cottonwood, a corner of Cottonwood and Third.
Thank you. So then the timeline, this is intentionally fuzzy and I tried to make gradients and make it hard to actually establish a strict timeline on it, and that's intentional. But yeah, so right now we're in June kickoff. I'm gonna be working over the next couple of months to put together some demographic analysis, figure out kind of where we are as a community. Again, have you guys read through the existing comp plan, figure out what is there is good, do we want to continue exploring and implementing and working on, and figure out what we can discard. And so once we kind of start collecting all that data, we'll start asking for community engagement. I'm aiming for the Labor Day celebration to be kind of the public facing kickoff to kind of get that feedback together. And then we'll start analyzing data, what the plan, start putting a plan together, draft review, aiming for about this time next year. And then start iterating on drafts till we get to a final, aiming for spring of 2027. Any questions on timeline? How often do we meet? I have it currently as once every other month. 2 to 3 hours of time, what I'm aiming for. Does that work for everybody? Does that seem like? If I meet you guys more frequently, like monthly, is that also plausible?
It's better for me and probably, I don't know, but if it's like a regular schedule, so
Yeah.
we can just like get it on the calendar. Yeah,
Everybody
yeah.
good with that? Do we just aim for whatever first, second Monday of the month or whatever it is right now?
Yeah.
You send out a calendar tricky.
I think some Mondays can be tricky, a lot of most Mondays and
That meeting's in the evening.
Yeah.
Same with me.
I will send out a doodle poll of like our referring time that works well for everybody. Then, the next page is the roles and responsibilities. Again, very high level, I'm gonna be managing the project and being the writer on most of this. I really like the do-it-yourself vibes of those existing comp plan and that it was created by the community. I wanna find ways to kind of keep that alive. But I also want to have a consistent voice and tone and have the entire vision kind of reflected throughout the document, so there's gonna be a blend of how it works, but I would encourage you guys to assist in writing. And, I do have a planner that'll be starting in August, and I'm very excited about that, to, be helping out a lot, so you'll be seeing him. Then, the Esther and the rest of the city staff to help me, with stuff, make sure things are actually doable. You guys are the providers of the local knowledge and insights and, again, a lot of technical expertise in various categories. I really want this to be a community driven plan and reflective of what the community wants to see, while it's being realistic about the achievability of what the community wants. So community input is going to be a very important piece of that. And then the planning and zoning commission and council are the ones that are actually adopting the document at the end of the process, so we need to be in touch with them. That needs to go work. And the next is the engagement plan. Again, the objectives on this, have informed conversations while still being approachable for a large audience. Reaching a substantial portion of the community that is consistent with our demographic profile, both economic and statewide, all those things. And then be available to the community where they are. So I wrote down a bunch of different things that I plan on doing. First one is again engagement events. So I end with Labor Day celebration, trunk or treat, tree lighting, whatever other things we can think of. Just be out there, set up a booth. Ideally, kind of come up with some creative games and activities that are associated the kind of match theme of whatever event we're doing. We'll do surveys like everybody does. They're a good way of collecting a lot of data. They're a little tougher to get really in depth with, but they do get a good swath of the community. Useful. The media club is like a book club, kind of the concept that I'm trying to do, or just meet up and review books and podcasts and whatever other interesting information related to planning and city government and that sort of stuff. I'm hoping that's kind of a way to educate the community and for them to educate the neighbors. A culture build. Then I talked with Jim Thurston of DC. Do you have a question?
Just the thought, in like putting together these documents, there's to be a lot of work sourcing relevant photos. And artwork and other visuals for the actual document and the, if you mean, media, so the learning opportunity. But there might be like an applied aspect to that where members of that club can go out and source photos of those things. Just thinking about like two birds with one stone. With like the ultimate plan production. Been working with Jim a little bit on setting up an advisory council of high school students. I think we'll probably start that up once school's back in session, but they're gonna have to live with it much longer than the rest of us, so they should have some say in it.
I'm working on tracking down some old payphone bits and making a tool like pick up the receiver, it gives you a prompt, you leave a message. Sort of thing, we can go scatter around town occasionally and get some more qualitative information, kind of go data out of that. And it's kind of fun. And then I'm gonna just kind of set up shop around town and then maybe on a bus or two, if I don't get too car sick and be available to talk to folks. And then, like, as we're figuring stuff out, getting information and interesting facts and figures put together, kind of come up with some ways of doing some like public art types of things and educating the community, through that. So that is my draft engagement plan. Any thoughts on any of that?
I love the phone idea. Yeah, another sure.
As far as engagements go, I'm on the board of the Delta Sky Reserve. And we're planning a number of events over the summer. And it'd be very easy to plan one at a park here and have an observing session. And I could bring in hopefully one of the amateur groups from like Twin Falls and see about that, but I can talk with you about that.
O'Donnell would be great for.
I know, that's what I was thinking, put that up there, as long as we can turn out the lights.
Okay, that is all I had. Does anybody have anything else?
Is this gonna be like, are you gonna provide us a document, like this is what we're shooting for an outline, what's the, or do we just start, this is the theme, we build on the theme?
As far as like
what are we working with?
that's gonna be plan framework, aim for October. Figure out what the actual shape of plan is gonna be.
Between now and October, we meet every other month to come up with this, what the framework of the document's gonna be.
So, so next month I had community engagement and existing conditions, more of a demographic analysis, and then like more finalized the community engagement plan with more specifics, and then I think we probably also start doing some framework stuff at that point. I'm trying not to get it too structured until we figured out like what the big picture, vision and mission goals are gonna be. Which I want at least some community engagement on, prior to establishing that. What being kind of slow in setting up the structure of it.
The existing comp plan should have a vision statement.
It does not.
No, it doesn't.
Are we gonna spend time going over the existing comp plan and seeing what we're?
Yeah, I was gonna send you guys the link to it after the meeting. I can also print out copies if you prefer to have a physical one. And just. It'd be a homework assignment for you guys to read it.
Are you envisioning the final product to be similar as far as the outline goes?
Not really. They expect that we'll probably use some of the goals and objectives out of the existing comp plan, but at least. Pretty substantial then.
Yeah, and I know there's state requirements about what has to be in there, and when we wrote the other comp plan, we certainly followed those, so I assume those probably didn't change at this point.
They have added airports, electrical facilities of statewide importance, and something else. But the other ones have not changed. They just have it on.
Okay.
Probably broad.
Was that?
Broadband.
Yeah.
Are there any other communities we should be like be a goal of focusing on what they did or what they didn't do? Is there a role model, I guess I'm asking?
I can send you a few comp plans of other Idaho towns that I like. I serve on the awards committee for the Idaho APA, the American Planning Association, Idaho chapter, and so I read much of them. That's something I like.
Have been initial cautionary tales that we should be thinking of or trying to avoid going into this process?
No, just trying to have a very open mind. That's it. Right, Tim?
Absolutely.
It might also be helpful to read the comp plans of the other jurisdictions that are nearby, because they do comment on demographics and other changes.
We did other ski towns too.
Cool.
And that was helpful.
Yeah.
It's sort of that similar issues.
And Haley just updated theirs, and Ketchum's in the process of updating theirs. We should have some current stuff.
Right.
You describe how a comp plan after our achievement gets used and by who and what weight does it actually carry?
So I'm gonna go in reverse. The weight is a guiding document. Not, does not establish any laws. It is, this is what you should be doing. This is what we ought to think about doing, sort of stuff. But again, it's not laws. Ideally, you use the comp plan to develop the ordinances and laws after to implement it. Who uses it? City council, planning and zoning commission are gonna be primary users of it. The land use is the power of the comp plan is derived from the local land use planning act, so the land use section of it kind of gets a little extra emphasis. But really, it should be also used by city staff, the community when they come to the city and say we want to do something, or we don't think this is an appropriate thing to be doing. They should be holding it up and saying, this is what we agreed we're gonna do and how we're gonna implement it. I forgot the first part.
That pretty near covered it,
Yeah.
yes.
How often are they revised? There's raising their
Kind
of funny.
Yeah, I think like the idealized standard is every 5 years, but that never happens. Again, it takes 2 years to do it at a time, and so that like constantly changing it. But yeah, every 10 years. I think we should have a target date on it of 20 to 25 years in the future, but plan on keeping it updated so you can. That's cool instead.
Is there a code update portion slated for after the adoption, or is that not necessarily needed?
Well, I think our code needs a lot of updating, but it's not planned for at this point. It'll probably be done as available as.
Is the council, are the council and mayor advising to take on the business district before concurrently with this comp plan update, or is that now in the back burner?
I think that's gonna have to do as much with my time availability as anything else. I would like to see progress made on that, but. Yeah, but. Anybody want to take motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good work, everybody.
Right.